Greetings, everybody. Thanks so much for coming out to celebrate the 35th anniversary of Project Censored, something that started in the mind of journalist and communications professor at Sonoma State University, Dr. Carl Jensen, and then carried on for 20 years and passed on to Dr. Peter Phillips, who's here this evening, and then I have some really huge shoes to fill here in the last year and a half, and I can tell you that I would not be able to do it were it not for Carl, for Peter, and for all the people that have been part of Project Censored and supported the project for these last 35 years. It's not it's more than an honor for me to have this opportunity to do something that I believe is one of the most important things we can do in our society, and that's really fight for a free press, fight for the commons of knowledge and information and the right to know what's going on, and really empower not just ourselves but each other in the process of building informed and aware communities to build a true democratic culture, not the illusions of ones that are projected at us from corporate media outlets like flickering shadows on Plato's cave. I'd like to thank Professor Jacob Van Vliet, who's not just a colleague but a good friend, and he really hooked it up for us at Moe's and all the people at Moe's, and Jacob and his wife Mariah really helped put everything out and the spread of food. Thanks to the cheese board and thanks to Peter Phillips' family for the wine. Please feel free to go and enjoy the whole night. Even if people are talking in 3 to 5 minute increments, because we have a whole smattering of people that are coming up to illustrate. I mean, I don't know how many of you folks may have listened to our radio show the other day. We've had a radio program on KPFA now for 9 months. We're on 8 a.m.s Friday morning as part of the morning mix. And many thanks to people for that opportunity, because Project Censored mission and the mission of Pacifica, it overlaps in extraordinary ways. But we had so many people coming on every 3 to 5 minutes, and that might sound like crazy radio. But I just want to emphasize the fact that there's so much that goes on in these books and on our websites, projectcensored.org and all of our sister sites. It's not just the top 10 or the top 25 stories. And we're doing work all year, every day. And I'd certainly like to have a special thanks to my family, my wife and daughter, because they could tell you that it's something that happens every day. The news never stops, the propaganda never stops, and it's a full-time gig to try to keep up with it, and we can't do it alone. We have a huge pool of people that help, and we invite all of you to help if you have not considered it, and you can check out more on the projectcensored.org website. So thanks to Jacob Van Vliet, thanks to Moe's, thanks to all of you for your support. You know, we have there were schedules over there. We have a whole lot of people that are going to come up and talk, and I'd like you to hear their contributions, what they've done for Project Censored this year and previous years, and so forth. But I really quickly, I'm not really good at really quickly, but I'd like to thank Abby Martin at Media Roots for helping us out this evening over here. She's videoing on our board. She'll be speaking here in a little while as well. But I really, again, just want to underscore that the mission of Project Censored is to not just highlight these top censored stories. A lot of times people get a hold of the books and they see the stories and they're just like, oh man, they have to go into hiding, for months because they can't handle certain things. More soldier suicides than people dying in combat. One of the stories this year, as context. The fairy tale of safe nuclear energy. Some of the stories are very heavy. The onslaught and rise of Lyme's disease. People get really overwhelmed, but we're really, really working on balancing a lot of the stories that we tell. And we don't just have stories of hope and positive change. We have stories about community development. Kenn Burrows is here from San Francisco State University. He's going to talk to us about that. We're also collaborating now with Dorothy Anderson, and we have something called the Fair Share, the Common Heritage So not just the commons of information, but just the commons in general of what we have as human beings. Mary is here to talk to us about that later on. So there's a whole host of things that we're doing now at Project Censored. It isn't just the censored stories. We have a whole section in the book on the truth emergencies that we face that's based on propaganda studies. In fact, Jacob Van Vliet has a chapter in that section on Jacques Ellul. So we're really expanding in a lot of ways. We're on over 30 campuses and universities. As you heard earlier, we have over 100 professors contributing in this book, hundreds of students, people from all over the world. And so, yes, that's some of your applause. We're not alone. And this isn't some, so many things, even on the left, turn into some kind of rock star symposium, where it's the one person in the book. And yes, my name is on the cover of the book. But my name wouldn't be on the cover of the book if there wasn't a project and there weren't so many other people that cared about this issue. And so, without getting into this too much, too detailed here, I think at the very beginning of chapter 1, I have a really old, fairly old quote from the 20th century, and I first learned of it from a musician friend. Past life things, composing and things that I've done, and it's really something that rings true, and it's something I think that we've really felt the project is something that we need to really deal with. Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore once said, "The truth comes as a conqueror only to those who have lost the art of receiving it as guest." Don't believe everything you think. Challenge, question, be open to possibilities. Try not to label and be, etc. And I think that what we do at Project Censored, which has certainly gotten us into some hot water over controversial issues, whether it's 9/11 or election fraud or governmental weather modification, there's always some people that are ready to point fingers and call foul and decry conspiracy theorist claims and so forth. And that really has no place in a free press culture or a free speech society or a society that honors the right to think individually and independently. And we have been doing that for a very long time. We will continue to cover those stories as long as there are factual studies based on things that we need to hear and see and face, regardless of how unpopular it's going to make somebody. And no matter how many snarky attacks we will endure, we're just going to keep doing what we do, and we've been doing it for 35 years. So. With that, I'd like to very quickly give a rundown of who's going to be coming up here, and I will start, of course, with, we're certainly going to hear from Dr. Peter Phillips. We're going to hear from Kenn Burrows on stories of creative change. We'll hear from Professor Adam Bessie on junk food news and news abuse, and Abby Martin of Media Roots. We'll also hear from independent journalist Nora Barrows Friedman. We'll hear from Ann Garrison on U.S. media coverage, lack of coverage, on U.S. policies in Africa. We'll hear from former Project Censored Associate Director Andy Roth, Dr. Andy Roth. We'll hear from Tracy Rosenberg of Media Alliance. We'll hear from independent journalist and filmmaker Josh Wolf and some students and Project Censored interns, and maybe even some special guests will pop in along the way. So again, thanks to all of you for coming, and thanks for celebrating our 35th year and our 2012 anniversary, our 2012 book release. Thank you. Right now, I'm going to introduce somebody that probably doesn't need an introduction, but deserves an introduction, at least in my mind, longer than we would have to be here. And Dr. Peter Phillips is professor of sociology at Sonoma State University. He is the co-editor author of 14 censored books. But he says that, but he had a big hand in helping put together what goes on here, as so many people do. Also co-edited Impeach the President during the Bush years, has won numerous awards, but I like to think one of the biggest awards, for me anyway, is that he's my most significant mentor, and I wouldn't be where I am today without him. So thanks to Peter Phillips.
Project Censored operates under a nonprofit corporation called Media Freedom Foundation, And scattered throughout this room are our members of the boards of directors. Could you please raise your hands? And Kenn right here, Nora, Bill, Kristen, Derek, Elaine, Abby, Mickey, and Mary. So that's well over half our board, and we've been a nonprofit 501c3 for the last 10 years, and that's what, when people donate and support us, that's where the money goes and it keeps all this running. I wrote the introduction of the book this year and helped with chapter 1 a lot, but the introduction really kind of defines our thinking about where corporate media is today. And 15 years ago, I was reading, of course, at that time, the propaganda model by Chomsky and Herman. We were looking at structural censorship and that. But since then, 9/11's happened, the Patriot Act's happened, the global wars have happened, and it's different. And so this introduction is reflecting our thoughts along that line. The international concentration of wealth and military power is endangering not only the personal freedoms and life chances of billions of people, but the potential for life on Earth to simply exist. The U.S. NATO industrial media empire, military industrial media empire, operates in support of the transnational corporations and the central banks as the primary enforcer of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank fiscal policies, and as a protector of transnational capital flow. Considering capital's needs for constant growth and profits, the combination of private ownership of production in partnership with these empire enforcers, military and police, both public and private, is resulting in a tragic decline of humanity into a freedomless state of global corporate fascism. I don't use that word softly. Chomsky has been saying fascism. Chris Hedges has been saying fascism. This is the thinking, and certainly within media. Many of the stories that Project Censored cover over the past 35 years have challenged the core myths of empire. These are stories about election fraud, transnational elite planning control, 9/11, torture, extensive civilian deaths in war, state crimes against democracy, massive military misspending, corporate tax evasion and misappropriation, economic resources, capital flight, unsustainable practices, environmental damage, and the denigration of world leaders who fail to cooperate with the neoliberal economic policies. We are in an era of total information control, top-down managed news throughout the empire. It is not against the law to lie to the public or to prepackage news to match empire propaganda myths. The time is right for democracy movements to build their own news and their own systems of decision-making from the bottom up. We no longer need a majority to make change within the empire. We need only active, informed populations in the 10 to 20% range of society to initiate change-producing social movements of resistance and non-cooperation with the empire. Individually and collectively, we can disconnect from employment that supports the empire of destruction. We can instead keep our work with community-based efforts at local sustainability, economic development, and caring. We can shop locally and never enter the Walmarts of empire. We can organize for resistance to counter the billions of dollars a year spent by the military to deceive our children into serving the empire of destruction. We can turn off the corporate media filled with its propaganda and lies and seek our own sources of news from within democratic movements worldwide. We can uncensor the news, utilizing the efforts of colleges, universities, validating news that Project Censored does internationally now. We invite activists and those concerned with the empire of destruction to speak truth to power with news and stories of the abuses of empire and the successes of our efforts of resistance. Telling our stories openly, transparently, will be vital to a global democratic movement. We will share the wealth of humanness to bring democratic change to save our grandchildren's children and the grandchildren themselves. Thank you.
Thank you to Peter Phillips. Our next speaker begins his chapter by quoting Stephen Covey, "Live out of your imagination, not your history." Ken Burrows writes, "This chapter is about good news. Yet I must warn you, we first have to explore some bad news. Business as usual is not working for people or the planet. We're facing a fundamental revision of human culture." So let's please welcome Professor Kenn Burrows from San Francisco State University, Professor of Holistic Studies. Kenn was one of the biggest contributors to the book this year in Chapter 1, as well as Chapter 4. He's also a member of the board. Kenn, welcome.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Hi there. So we know many of these things already, right? We stand here, and I really wonder, in fact, Eisenhower said it this way: if you're not solving a problem, you have to enlarge it. So we're often not solving our problems, so maybe we actually need to enlarge some of these so that we actually start paying attention to what's going on. So I had the task of writing a chapter about good news in a time of decline. That's a bit of a paradox. But yet that's really, I take the matter seriously, and with, I hope that you'll get the book and see. But let's talk about the problem for a moment before we can really get to the solution. For centuries, the modern industrial societies have been living off the capital of abundant nature and labor itself. And the great folly of this market-state complex is that it leaves nature and you and I, society itself, out of the equation, and tends to externalize the equation of solutions, of saying market forces have to rule. So clearly we need some alternatives. I wrote a part of Chapter 1 about a news cluster, the collaboration in the common good. It's the first time that's actually been in the book. How do we start looking for news that's about the common good, about how do we collaborate, how do we begin to work across our differences, how do we look for news that informs us about that versus just about the problems. So we need both greater awareness of problems, and some of them have to become more clear to us. We can't name a chaos, we can't change a chaos we can't name. So first of all, we have to be able to name the chaos we're in. And secondly, how are we going to collaborate around this when we're so fragmented? If something terrible was to go on in our neighborhood somewhere, would you know where to go to show up to lend a hand? We really don't have the collaborative structures in place to begin to create much of the good news we're all looking for. So this is what I wrote about. And also, so in the first section, the cluster of good news, we have 3 different stories we highlight there, but also about the barriers to good news. The good news, that is, of collaboration and the common good. First of all, centralized power and the media, obvious, and we'll talk about that all night here. Also, something we need to begin to be more aware about, the escalating complexity of our lives. The interacting systems of nature, technology, and culture. And the competing worldviews and this need for public engagement, that we might somehow engage each other and find collaborative connection and service and beginning to work together. So that's the starting point of this chapter. And I would suggest our first major snag is that if you take a look at social biological studies, that we as a species do not do very well with complex, long-term, invisible problems. We tend to like short-term, fix-it-now kind of issues. So you can see this often mirrored in our stories. And we need somehow to find a way to deal with the long-term issues such as climate change, invisible toxins, economic instability and disparity, militarization, climate change, commercialization of everything. So these issues are not so easily seen, and this is part of us recognizing the problems, is that we have a hard time doing that if they're deep and long-term. And studies of perceptual blindness show that human brains are typically hardwired to exclude, that is, to ignore or discredit information that does not fit their current system of belief. So if you tend to be stressed and overwhelmed, and who isn't these days, you may tend to simplify the issues. You won't see the complex nature of things. So how do we find our way to begin to move beyond the fixed systems that tend to oversimplify and therefore really get us stuck in solving actually very complex problems? So I would suggest we actually need a new type of activism. And a big part of this chapter 4 that I wrote is about that. That we're fundamentally out of step with, we have one crisis, one major crisis, that's a crisis of perception. The very way we're looking at problems is inadequate. Our minds are really a big part of the problem. So to shift this crisis, we need to explore the limiting worldviews that we have and that are inhabiting our minds, and that literally the solution lies in altering our worldview. That if we change our worldview, we can change our world. And the dominant worldview, of course, is that the market and money systems and material achievements are going to fix our future. So I've suggested in the chapter that we redefine activism, that we begin to look at the paradoxes we're living in, that the modern worldview is very much, has a lot of gifts. It's not just all bad. It has with it many things that we value. Anybody been to a dentist lately? So there are many things within the modern worldview that we want to hold on to. And history's greatest theme might be, in fact, the trading of goods and ideas across our differences. But that way we often begin to expand our worldview and begin to expand our way of thinking. So this open exchange of information can lead to a new type of activist, is my suggestion. Something I call in the chapter a knowledge worker. Knowledge workers wear different hats. You can be a manager, a designer, an educator, many different types of knowledge workers. Knowledge workers understand we're living inside of a web of information, and that this age of information needs to shift to the age of relationship. And to do that, we need to somehow, these knowledge workers need to be translators to help the rest of us connect the dots. The knowledge workers have the social and emotional capacities to not get so stuck in the dichotomies of simplistic thinking. And it can hold the creative tension necessary for us to think in more complex ways. So it'll take a certain amount of capacity building within our activism to make this possible. I'll give you an example. In some of the traffic safety ads that happened in Europe, they began noticing two different types of ads. They tried them both out. One was very fact-oriented, very fear-based, again, labeling problems and oversimplifying situations. And then they contrasted that with approaches that were also not fear, included fact, but were in fact also fun and upbeat, and choices were given so you could see various outcomes and options. They basically helped you see complexly, and yet they also did it with humor. And you might imagine which of these two ads were more successful. By far, those ads showing positive emotions and humor and fact were much more successful than fear-based, simplistic approaches to traffic safety. And this mirrors this whole idea of what a knowledge worker is, that our worldview has to become holistic. It has to be informed by systems thinking. And although many of us know that conceptually, doing that is challenging. We all think we do that when in fact we're all locked into these animal minds. And the whole idea that knowledge workers are bridge builders and translators for the rest of us, that the new activist, I would suggest, has to be able to hold these difficult conversations so that you're not so caught in the dichotomies of left and right and so on. And knowledge workers are not trapped in this public-private sector or any other kind of dichotomy you might imagine. Knowledge workers are willing to get their ideas from anywhere, and they really trust the perspectives that come from anyone, and they value everyone and respect them. Therefore, conversation is likely. We started on our campus a group called Orange Band, and people wear these orange bands, and people might ask, well, what's that about? And the whole idea is that people ask. And you say, well, I'm glad you asked. This is about having meaningful conversations. So how might we be invited into a meaningful conversation about a world that's becoming more and more complex for us, and one we're getting quite lost in? So we wrote about 6 good news clusters that were a way of describing this emerging culture that's beginning to understand complex thinking and beginning to move us in that direction. So the community and collaboration, economy and fair exchange, media and education, mind and consciousness, nature and technology, and politics and people power. So within these 6 frames, we have fairly extensive news sources from this last year that are good news that actually help us think in very different ways. And there's one in particular, just to finish up. There is an invisible hand, another invisible hand in the world, I would suggest, that's part of something we can rely upon as we hold these meaningful conversations. And that is that that there's this great goodness in the world, that people like you and I and many, many people you know go to work every day to try to restore nature, to try to bring a balance to a system that's way out of balance. And that invisible hand is often discounted and not measured and really not understood. If you look at instruments like Wikipedia, where people go every day to try to update this to make a resource available for us, or Copyleft, or many of those other social collaborative efforts, those are vehicles of collaboration. My suggestion is we need to find collaborative practices that really need to still be invented in part, that really help us create the conversations that are often difficult to have, that help us realize we all have something valuable to hear and something valuable to offer. And with that, there's a study by the Institute of Noetic Sciences. They're talking about, I would define it as a knowledge worker, the capacities, 5 different levels of social and emotional competence that you can find within our culture. And they're suggesting that there is one of these that is in fact definable as the individual that is learning how to hold this complexity. So we're actually getting studies about this, and chapter writes about this and talks about it. I was fortunate to work with many good students in this process, and I think you'll find when you get to the chapter more good news that you might have known was out there this last year. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kenn Burrows. That's Kenn is in chapter 1 and in chapter 4. So feel free to pick up books. They're in the back. Even if you're not going to be able to buy one now, you can get one another time if you like. Feel free to check us out online at projectcensored.org. But please feel free to pick up a couple of the books back there, even if you want to pass them around and look through them in the table of contents while people are speaking, so you can see what all is going on in the books. And don't forget, there are refreshments here. Feel free to get up at any time during the proceedings and help yourselves, please. Well, Kenn was just talking a little bit about the crisis of perception, and at the core of some of our issues, and certainly some of our perception, certainly in mass culture, has been guided by mass media. And Carl Jensen, the founder of Project Censored, not only was looking at what news was going on that wasn't being reported in the corporate, so-called mainstream media. It's corporate, it's not mainstream, but that's the co-optation and propaganda that goes along with it. Carl was looking into some critiques. People were saying, well, hey, look, there's this thing called news judgment, and we can't fit everything into the newspapers and on TV. It's not censorship, it's just how it is. It's a structural imperfection. So Carl Jensen said, well, okay, that's an interesting criticism. Let me see what the media are covering then. Let me see what every precious column inch and second is comprised of. And what Carl started to find out is it was, even in 1984 when he started doing this, it was soundbite culture. And it was titillating culture. And it was what he called Twinkies for the brain, or junk food news. And then later on, Peter Phillips coined the term news abuse. And stories that were news, but they took a strange, titillating turn off into the bizarre or irrelevant. And so since 1980, since the first book in 1993, even though the project started in 1976, we've been looking at junk food news, what the media spent a lot of their time covering. And for the last several years, I've helped work on this chapter, and again this year I've had the pleasure of working on it with Professor Adam Bessie at Diablo Valley College, where I teach, also with Abby Martin at Media Roots, Clifton Damians, and some others. Chris Hedges writes in an interview with Media Roots, we are awash in electronic hallucinations, and the worse it gets, the more we retreat into those hallucinations. Dying cultures always sever themselves from reality, because reality becomes so difficult to face, and we're no exception to that. And Adam particularly writes about framing and propaganda. And this year we looked specifically at how teachers and public workers are framed. Again, corporate media is often designed to twist things around in a way that makes us see the people that are really proactive and the people that are really doing the good work of the community, the kind of things that Kenn was just talking about, but somehow strangely turns them into part of the enemy and us-them culture. So please welcome Adam Bessie to talk a little bit about his work.
Thank you. I'm a digital native, and so I'm always having to move, so I have to pull this off. So, speaking of being a digital native, I'm going to start this discussion with Angry Birds. And that's kind of a little bit of a departure from Kenn. Does anyone know what Angry Birds is? I'm just kind of curious. Okay, speaking of digital hallucinations, what is Angry Birds? Anyone just shout it out.
Kids game.
It's a kid's game, right? And what do you do in this game?
Destroy stuff.
You destroy stuff, right? Well, I realized when we were researching this year that Angry Birds was the Rosetta Stone for all the junk food and news abuse stories. Think about it, right? Angry Birds. You take this little bird and you shoot at these greedy pigs that have taken your eggs, taken your money, right? There's all this understandable rage this year, right? People are losing their pensions, losing their jobs, and there's some fat cat that has got all the money, right? So if you look at a lot of the junk stories this year, they're all about anger and rage, right? Charlie Sheen going nuts, right? The Ground Zero Mosque, right? All these stories are filled with anger and rage. And so what I realized is, speaking of electronic hallucinations, that this game, Angry Birds, was sublimating all the rage we have. Since we can't be angry directly at reckless, speculative Wall Street, we can sublimate our rage into a video game, into these BS stories about Ground Zero Mosque that aren't at Ground Zero, technically, right? And in particular, what I looked at as a teacher, and my wife who's here is a high school teacher as well, and we were both working like 12-hour days every day. Teachers have become, something out of this book, like pariahs. I just saw this down here, right? So, yeah. Yes, teachers, to respond to that, weren't they always? Yes. I mean, the old phrase is, if you can't do, teach. And this year, it's really been strange that has gone on steroids, that sentiment. That teachers are something like welfare queens, perhaps, right? Yeah, and you'll see in the chapters, the section, teachers are, public workers, the new welfare queens, right? You would think that your first grade teacher, Miss Washington, her pension had personally bankrupted our economy, right? She'd done it. She's the villain, right? And so all this understandable rage that we have is being sublimated and framed, and that's why our chapter is called Framing the Messengers. It's been framed on different parties, right? We have the Ground Zero Mosque. We've got public workers, the DMV employee who's lazy and is eating cake, right? On his lunch break. This was not in the corporate news, but on NPR actually, right? In a segment called Let Them Eat Cake. And then most of all, you've heard about this, about public employees. Who remembers that, right? Public employees' pensions are too high, right? And in particular, teachers. Teachers, these lazy, bad teachers are apparently endemic in our system, right? You listen to Michelle Rhee. Has anyone heard of her? I'm just kind of curious, right? Two people, okay? Michelle Rhee is this superstar superintendent who's in all the mass media. She's never really taught before, and her whole approach is, corporate style, mass layoffs of bad teachers, accountability, right? Which means tying test scores to teacher evaluation, right? And so you would think that it wasn't the Wall Street bankers that, again, did it, but teachers that were responsible for the economy falling apart. And all these endemic broken schools that are destroying us, protected by, most of all, the evil union, right? You guys recognize that story? Does that sound familiar somewhat, right? Okay. It's not that we have now, if you guys have just heard a recent study in the census came out, that we have the most people in poverty in the history of this country, right? It's not that. Don't look at that, right? It's not all the foreclosures. That's not it. No, it's these lazy teachers that aren't motivated because they don't have free market forces acting on them. Right? And I'm serious. So the idea is, the problem is the market in education is not free. And that's why the students are performing so bad. That's why our schools are so screwed up. And so the only solution is we need to take away the unions and empower the free market. We need charter schools, competition, right? And that's going to save us. And that was kind of going back to what Kenn said, this faith in free market forces, which requires an amazing suspension of disbelief when we just saw those deregulated forces destroy the economy, and yet we're turning back to them like some sort of Stockholm syndrome, right? So in this chapter, we looked at that narrative, and it was not only in the corporate media, although it was there most pervasively, but you would see it in Huffington Post, in independent media. It was pernicious everywhere. And what we were seeing is an education reform bubble, much like the housing bubble or the bubble that led us to the war on Iraq. An incredible amount of hype, not really grounded in reality. And we're still amidst that right now. And part of that goes back to what Kenn said about a meaningful dialogue. There has been no meaningful dialogue about education in the last year. It's been filled with hyperbole, with anger, with all this sublimated rage that we're talking about. It's been very unreasonable, right? For example, as Mickey pointed out, has anyone here heard of the film Waiting for Superman? Okay. So that film is about 5 kids that are struggling in an urban school to get by, trying to get into charter school, right? And the charter schools are presented as the heroes. The teachers are presented as the villains, and they're in the way of the students, right? That was a multimedia enterprise. Bill Gates, who was in the film, Michelle Ray, who was in the film, Bill Gates has poured $2 million of his money into that film. It then is cross-promoted on NBC and all of the affiliates with NBC in this segment called Education Nation, right? Bill Gates, is part of that, right? Has a financial interest in it. And one of the most prominent critics of this, Diane Ravitch, who was George Bush I's Assistant Secretary of Education, and who was a fierce proponent of market forces, and saw the data and said, this isn't working. And she wrote a book that was an award-winning book. She was blocked from coming on. Davis Guggenheim, the director of Waiting for Superman, said, I won't share the stage with her. And she was given 30 seconds. Ann Ravitch, who had been a regular contributor to the New York Times up until her change, was barred from publishing the New York Times. She told me in an email interview. And her publisher could not get her on a single program to debate with any of the reformers. And so what we've seen is, 1 minute, yes. To wrap up, what we've seen basically, to go back to Kenn, is that this is a really important issue, education. It's exciting. I've been a teacher 10 years. Now we're finally talking about education. We never talk about it, but it's not a meaningful discussion. And so what I hope is that next year we write about this, or we'll be in the other section, in Kenn's section on positive change. So thank you very much. Hope I didn't rant too much like I'm in class. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Of course, being the ringleader and herder of cats, I usually don't win lots of points. But we're also trying to entice people to, get a little teaser and pick up the book. Even if you can't buy it or don't buy it, pick it up and leaf through it and see what we're talking about, because there's a lot of things that are censored in our culture. Again, it's not just these top stories. And education reform is one. Just the whole issue of reform in general. Reform has been a term that's been used by the establishment to make it seem like people's voices are being heard and the system is being attenuated and everything is moving along just great and everything is just fine. These aren't the droids you're looking for. And then we sort of end up back into this scenario where somehow things didn't change like we maybe hoped or thought they would. Outsourcing hope and change is not a wise policy for a culture that purports to be self-governing. Well, the whole theme, in fact, of the book this year is moving beyond media reform, moving beyond many different kinds of reform. You heard Kenn Burrows talking about approaching a new type of activism and knowledge working. Well, our next speaker, too, by the way, just to segue, put Abby Martin and Elizabeth Cady Stanton in the same sentence. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, the great suffragist in the 19th century, once said, "Reformers who are always compromising have not yet grasped the idea that truth is the only safe ground to stand upon." And as we face this truth emergency, this culture, this society that has such a hard time discerning between fact and fiction or opinion, we're awash in this sort of hyper-real landscape. What we need isn't reform. We need a radical media revolution and an information revolution and community building to change these types of issues that we face. And Abby Martin is the founder of the website MediaRoots.org. And if you look at the word radical, it means to the root, going to the roots. And that's what you need to do to fix our problems and situations. And you need to creatively think about how and reimagine how we could do things. So our next speaker and newest board member to Media Freedom Foundation is Abby Martin. Abby?
Thanks so much for coming out tonight to celebrate Project Censored. I'm absolutely honored to be a part of this organization. I was doing political activism in San Diego, and I came across a weird thing. I started to realize that the liberal media establishment that I was following was censoring certain things about issues that I cared about. I thought that was really strange. So I found Project Censored, and it kind of just dawned on me that they are, they're one of the most credible organizations in the world to me. And the second that I moved up here, I just hounded Mickey. I was like, okay, I saw Peter speak in San Diego, I was blown away. He was really powerful, and I was just like, this is exactly what needs to happen. Project Censored is right on point. And I just knew that I needed to be up here and be a part of it. I was sick of just seeing these unaesthetic, just bad-looking websites that were aggregating news, and I just was, I know that the answer is we need to create our own. Like Mickey said, we can't wait around for the media reform movement to do it for us, because they're not. They slow eking out, throwing the public a bone. So I just took it upon myself. I made a website called MediaRoots.org. It's just a citizen journalism project, but really what it is it's just another component of the media revolution, the media renaissance that's going on, where citizens are going out in the street and figuring out what the hell is going on in their community. And so I'm working closely with Mickey and Peter, and we're doing KPFA every week. I contributed a portion to their book about media roots and about the importance of citizen journalism and what we need to be doing. We need to take it upon ourselves now, because we can't count on the corporate media establishment, obviously, to do anything or tell us anything that's going on. And I also wrote a little bit about junk food news. While America and the whole world was waiting in anticipation to see Charlie Sheen's urine test results, there were actual things going on, like the nuclear meltdown and the potentially unconstitutional bombing of Libya. And so I wrote a little bit about that and just the saturation of Sarah Palin when she's not even a candidate, and somehow she's still a relevant figure, even though she's completely inept. So yeah, I just touched upon those and talked about what was really going on while those were completely saturating the airwaves. So really excited to be a part of Project Censored. Very honored to be here. Thanks so much for showing up, you guys. Just really excited. Thanks so much.
Our next speaker is someone that I'm sure you all know. She is an award-winning journalist. She's a member of the Media Freedom Foundation board. She's a former producer at Flashpoints on KPFA and Pacifica Radio. Nora Barrows Friedman is she's an amazing person that goes to the heart of places where the corporate media and the Western media just don't want you to go and don't want you to see certain things. And she tells the stories of people who can't tell them themselves. That's just one thing that she does. And that's really the role of a journalist and a truth teller. And she's certainly one of the most courageous people that I've ever met. And she's contributed to our books, and she's helped us hook up with another great journalist, John Elmer, who wrote a chapter in the book this year called Establishing Ghetto Palestine. And Nora's here today to talk to us about her work. She's written for Al Jazeera English, Electronic Intifada, and a host of other publications. And she's here to talk to us about what she does. So please welcome Nora Barrows Friedman.
Short enough for me, that's fantastic. Hi, thanks for coming tonight, and thank you for Project Censored for existing in a dearth of information and real analysis. So Actually, I helped edit this one chapter. I didn't contribute a chapter this year, but as Mickey said, this chapter in here about Palestine is called Establishing Ghetto Palestine, and I encourage you all to read it. It was fantastic, and it was an honor to bring John Elmer into this book. He's one of the best journalists, best analysts working on and in Palestine today, and corporate media doesn't want to give him a platform. Funny what happens when people tell the truth. But actually, for the last 2 weeks, or a week ago, so 3 weeks ago, for 2 weeks, I was in the inimitable Orange County. Not for vacation, not for the wonderful strip mall fair, but I was there to cover a trial. And how many of you, just a show of hands, how many of you have gone to a protest before? All right, awesome. How many of you have carried signs at that protest? Cool. How many of you have, wielded a bullhorn or shouted some slogan or something at that protest? Right. Okay, now you're all criminal conspirators, apparently. The state of California has convicted 11 Muslim students of criminal conspiracy charges for holding a protest against an Israeli official a year and a half ago. I'm talking about the Irvine 11, and I was there for about 2/3 of the trial, and I was there when the jury convicted these 11 students of UC Irvine and UC Riverside for holding a protest under the legal jurisdiction of the First Amendment, which we all hold, very dear and near to our hearts, of course. The state of California, and in essence, the country, is now establishing these very dangerous precedents for all of us as truth tellers and people of consciousness and people who protest and document protests. Josh Wolf, of course, is here and can talk about what happens when you try to document what the state is doing. But this sets, like I said, a very dangerous precedent. And so, the fact that these 11 students luckily escaped jail time because the judge said that even though the jury convicted the students, that jail time would be inappropriate due to their political beliefs and the fact that they're motivated by their personal beliefs. So there is a glimmer of hope, but the fact that this trial was not thrown out in the first place, that it went through 18 months of investigations and a grand jury subpoenaed trial and then a civil trial, and the head of the homicide division of the Orange County District Attorney's Office was sent to be the lead prosecutor in this case for 11 students who spoke their mind and engaged in a legal, lawful protest against an Israeli official who not just hyperbolically, but actually literally had a lot to do with the massacres in Gaza in the winter of 2008 and 2009, which killed approximately 1,400 Palestinians in a 22-day period, including several hundred children. Some of the Irvine 11 students actually had family members who were killed in that massacre. And as Mickey said, Palestinians are not given a platform at UC Irvine. They are not given VIP tickets to a Lakers game, as Michael Oren, the Israeli ambassador who spoke that night, where it was given. They are silenced, they are censored, and it is up to us as media makers and truth tellers and people who believe that human beings all over the world should have a voice and a platform to speak truth to power. And those who stand in solidarity should also be given the same respect and the same jurisdiction to level our protest and outrage against war criminals who are invited by university administrations. We should all be outraged and we should all work harder, and that's why Project Censored is such a treasure. And congratulations on 35 years of speaking truth to power and not being afraid to do so. So thank you.
Thank you, Nora. Just a reminder, this is not for Nora, but a reminder that some of the speakers, please remember that you have to speak directly into the mic so people all the way into the back can hear. We heard Nora, but some of the others haven't been doing that as well, so please do that so the people in the back can actually hear. The next speaker is Ann Garrison. Ann Garrison is an independent journalist. She's written for many different publications, and in this year's book, we included a chapter. Again, we included a whole chapter. As you'll notice, if you pick up the 2012 book, every chapter could be 10 books. So it's hard to, as Ann could tell us, it's hard to fit so much sometimes into one chapter, and I think she really did an incredible job dealing with this massive subject. And she was writing about U.S. policies in Africa and media coverage about what goes on in Africa. And she was writing about several other things during the process. And again, it was such an ongoing scene for her. And Ann Garrison also works at KPFA News. But again, she found it difficult to finish because it's an ongoing struggle, just as what Nora's talking about. These are ongoing. And I know our publishers at Seven Stories Press and all the people that help us there, Veronica Liu, John Gilbert, Dan Simon, the owner of Seven Stories Press, they have deadlines. And we go back and forth and they say, hey, where's that book? And then later on we say, where is our book? And we're waiting for it. So it's a really challenging thing, and I really thank all the people that contributed, and certainly thank them for trying to honor deadlines. I'm not good at it myself. But it is something that's difficult to close a chapter that's not finished. And again, that's the reminder too, and that's again why there's one of these every year. It's not a finished thing, it's ongoing. Whether it's Carl or Peter or me and everybody else that's doing it now, or who's going to be doing it 35 years from now, I hope that we wouldn't need a Project Censored. That would be great. But it doesn't look like that's where we're going right now. So without further ado, I'd like to again introduce Ann Garrison. She wrote about the U.S. and Africa, Velvet Glove on a Military Fist.
Thank you very much. I'm glad Peter explained the difficulty I had writing that essay. I want to say first that I am so glad that I'm after Nora, even though this rearranges my outline, because I have wanted to explain that Rwanda, which is the tiny East Central African nation, which is central to the story that I've been trying to tell for the last 3 years, is, in American foreign policy, the Israel of Africa. And the propaganda machine behind this idea that Rwanda is the Israel of Africa and the Holocaust is equal to the Rwanda genocide is now essential to foreign policy used to justify intervention in Africa. It is a false equation. The Holocaust was not equal to the Rwanda genocide. There is a massive cover-up that has been going on for 17 years about what really happened in the Rwanda genocide. And I would really like to ask Nora, would you try to arrange a meeting with Dennis Bernstein about this? Because I am convinced that if the progressive Jewish community, people like Nora Bernstein, Ali Abunimah, Norman Finkelstein, Noam Chomsky, understood the false equation of the Holocaust and the Rwanda genocide, which dishonors the victims of both tragedies, then both the advocates for the victims of both would become stronger, and U.S. foreign policy in Africa would be far better understood. Okay, Nora, I'm going to talk to you about this subject. Okay. What?
I don't work at Flashpoints anymore.
Okay, I'm assuming you still have a little more influence over Dennis than I do. Although Dennis has invited me on the show. I was on once about Uganda. Dennis said to me, I don't understand anything about Africa, therefore I'm nervous about reporting it. And this is the usual problem. When I was writing this essay, I had a terrible time. Mickey and Peter were infinitely patient. They said 3,000 to 5,000 words, and I said, oh, no problem. I've been churning out 3,000 to 5,000 words a week for the last 2 or 3 years. When I started to write this, I would write a paragraph, or I would write a page, or I would write several pages, and then I would say, this isn't going to make any sense to anyone, because they don't have any context. That's the problem with Africa reporting, no context. I'm also a member of the Green Party, and at one point the Green Party asked me to write something for their foreign policy platform. They said it was all about the Middle East. If I didn't write something, I wasn't going to include anything about Africa. So that's the problem. Peter and Mickey were infinitely patient. I kept postponing the deadline, and in the end I wrote an extra 1,000 words. Then Mickey finally lost patience and said, well, anybody could write an extra 1,000 words. Anyway, we got through it. Now, I actually have some success to report and some practical strategies. I have had some success in changing the way that the Rwanda genocide story has been told. Professor Peter Erlander, the former president of the National Lawyers Guild, who was arrested in Rwanda last year when he went to defend Victoire Ingabire-Umuhoza, who is on trial now for contesting the received history of the Rwanda genocide, told me that, well, Anne, I know you haven't gotten rich at this, but when you have to face St. Peter, you can at least say that you have changed the way that the Rwanda genocide story is being told. Now, for the practicalities of this, first, I want to thank Anthony Fest, one of the unsung heroes of KPFA. Anthony, stand up! Anthony, stand up! I wrote a story in the San Francisco Bayview about the U.S. backing the Rwandan invasion of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. One thing to understand about this is that when you're talking about Rwanda, now you're talking about Congo. Congo has de facto colonized eastern Congo. And there's fear that it will be balkanized, that after the Congo election, the Kivus will be split off and made part of Rwanda. Anthony read this article in San Francisco Bayview. He called me and said, do you want to be on KPFA News? We did that a couple of times, and then in February when the Rwandan election was going on, 1 minute, okay, whoa, okay, that's all right, I said, okay, I'm gonna skip to my notes, it's all in the essay. Right now, Victoire Ingabire is on trial in Rwanda for contesting the history of the Rwanda genocide. What has she said? That not only Tutsis but also Hutus died, that there were extremist Tutsis who killed Hutus, that there were extremist Tutsis, how did I say it? There were extremist Hutus who killed Tutsis, extremist Tutsis who killed Hutus. What I was saying about Israel is that the story is that it was the genocide of a minority, the Tutsi minority, and therefore it was like the Holocaust. And therefore, Rwanda has the same victim's privilege that Israel has, to invade its neighbors, to invade and colonize its neighbors, to seize their land, to seize their resources. This is now a centerpiece of American foreign policy. There's something called the Mass Atrocities Prevention Operations Military Handbook, produced at the Harvard Carr Center for Human Rights Policy. And central figures in the Carr Center for Human Rights Policy now sit at the side of Obama, and now I thought I just had 1 minute, now I've got another minute, thank you. Okay, there's Samantha Power and Gail Sheehy, they now sit at the side of Obama on the National Security Council. Samantha Power, who wrote Bystanders to Genocide in the Atlantic Monthly about the Rwanda genocide, is most credited for convincing Obama to invade Libya. The argument is that we were bystanders to the Rwanda genocide. Now we must be upstanders, i.e. we must invade all over Africa to protect civilians, as we did in Libya. Okay. Victoire Ingabire is on trial for contesting this. The international press, she is contesting the justification of the Rwandan dictatorship and the Rwandan occupation of Congo, where 6 million people have died thanks to this. And the international press has gone stone cold silent. I find myself in a situation where only the Rwandan government's official newspaper, the New Times, is reporting this, and me. Now, as to success, when I have written about this, I have gotten on the top of the Google search headlines all the time. Every time I can get a publication together, I get on the top of the Google search headlines. Right now, it's only the official Rwandan newspaper and me, and I have asked other people, please, in the Rwandan diaspora, please write about this. I will get it published in the Bayview and AfrobeatRadio.net and Global Research. We can beat Fox News, Reuters, AP. We do it all the time because the Google search algorithm can perceive unique news. So that is a market, and my only beef with KPFA really is that they have not taken advantage of the media revolution created by the Google search algorithm, which creates the opportunity for them to beat Fox News, Reuters, AP, etc. all the time by producing unique news. Okay, now I had something else to say about LGBT rights in Africa, the way that is usually misreported, but I'm out of time, so it's in the book.
We have a quick impromptu speaker. We have a really courageous citizen of the world that splashed down into Berkeley, California some time ago, just early here this year, and also has really made it possible to have a lot of things, subjects and topics that have, previously not been terribly popular or widely covered at Free Speech Radio. It really made some of those things possible, and we're really grateful for Andrew Phillips, and we'd like him to come up as the general manager interim of KPFA and say a few quick words before we hear from Dr. Andy Roth.
Into the mic. Look, it's really great to be here, and it's the first time I've been to an event like this with such a bunch of radicals. This is the heart, this is the place, Berkeley is the place. KPFA is the crown jewel in the Pacifica network, 64 years. We could be doing better, we could be doing worse, but we're still here, that's the main thing. And I want to really congratulate Mickey and Peter, who's out the back, not too far out the back, and all of his colleagues, all of your colleagues who produced this great publication. They gave me a copy a couple of weeks ago. It's just so important that they do the work they do, and I'm very proud and more than happy to be able to facilitate and encourage. And when they come in and they say, Andrew, we need an hour, I say, what about 3? And they do 3.5 on the cost of war, where I learned for the first time that 50,000 soldiers committed suicide. It's a shocking statistic. And we're at last in KPFA with some real fervour. We got some 9/11 reporting going, which is great. And there will be more of that and other programs and information that our listeners, this country, this world needs to hear, will hear, because Pacifica Radio is here and will stay here. And we will go out, we will ask you for money. Kim Klein, the great fundraiser, told me, you know, Andrew, 7 out of 10 people give money. And you know what? When people go to church, they give it every week. So don't be embarrassed about asking for it next week. So I won't be. And don't you be embarrassed about asking your friends to tune in and tell them to ask their friends to tune in and use the social network, even if we won't, even if we can't, because there are certain obstructions in our system. But for now, ask your friends. Thank you, guys. It's a real privilege to be here, and it's a real privilege to be with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for coming up. Our next speaker is former Associate Director of Project Censored and a sociologist, Dr. Andy Roth, who writes in this book about power, abuse, and accountability. And of course, Project Censored has long tried to really write about the importance of holding people in power accountable. And Andy Roth writes about that in our first chapter this year. This is the first year that we've actually broken chapter 1 up into what are called censored news clusters, where they're discussed in topics. The top stories, people were used to seeing them in lists. Top 25, the top 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We love lists. I don't know why. But listing is great. But also listing, the tyranny of listing tends to obscure the topical architecture of censorship that exists in our purportedly free press society. So looking at the subjects and looking at the stories in the top 25 within those subjects, and then all the other stories out of the almost 300 that were nominated that fit into that category, these 7 different categories that we have right now, really helps show how censorship works. And it's not just the big black hand of government that comes down and redacts things out of the sky. It's framing, it's sliding of content. It's a whole bunch of other tactics. And again, we have this whole propaganda section in the book that you really should check out this year. So again, let's give a hand to Dr. Andy Roth as he talks a little bit about his history with the project. Andy.
Thanks, Mickey. I want to begin by paying my respects to Carl and Peter and Mickey and the reporters whose independent and investigative journalism Project Censored has celebrated for 35 years, as well as some of the previous Project Censored interns who I've worked with, people like Bridget Thornton, Caitlin Pinson, Jeff Hewling, Joss Thomas, worked with Project Censored interns on stories like how the photographs of war that appear in the Chronicle and the Times don't show us the human cost of war. Worked with Project Censored student interns on stories about the Military Commissions Act. And so these are people who have challenged me to do more and to be more courageous than I would be otherwise. So I pay my respects. Before we got started tonight, my spouse said that if I talked too long here, she'd be back at the moleskin display admiring the texture of the handbooks and notebooks, so I better move quick. As Mickey mentioned, I came to Project Censored as a sociologist and as a teacher, and I see as one of my sociological ancestors, one of my inspirations, the sociologist C. Wright Mills, who wrote about the power elite. And in one of his writings about the power elite, he said that the job of people like sociologists who investigate power in our society is to understand how power changes in society, how changes in society open opportunities for elites, how elites take advantage or fail to take advantage of those opportunities. And what I want to do tonight, I'm not going to tell you about something in the book. I'm going to tell you about something that I anticipate writing about for next year's book. But my point in doing so tonight is not to feel like the book is great. There's amazing stuff in the section I wrote about power and abuse on private prisons and the debunking of those as profitable money-making institutions by Peter Cervantes Gauci and so I draw you to the book, but I want to talk about a story that I read as I ate breakfast this morning by way of telling you how I think a Project Censored intern might make sense of this story and why it's important that you continue to support Project Censored. So I'll first begin reading from this story I found without telling you where it's from. President Obama steered the nation's war machine into uncharted territory Friday. This is in reference to the drone, basically executions of 2 American citizens in Yemen.
Lynching.
It was believed to be the first instance in which a U.S. citizen was tracked and executed based on secret intelligence and the president's say-so. Pretty good summary lead. This is actually from an AP News story, and this is the kind of thing that I think makes Project Censored's work challenging for skeptics. You might look at this and say, hey, the AP is doing a good job. That's a skeptical summary lead of what went on, right? New, uncharted territory. But if you go on and read the story, it's business as usual. I'm skipping a few paragraphs, but here are some selected bits from the remainder of the story. The AP, this was in the Chronicle this morning. It's something we had to do, said Representative Peter King, Republican of New York, chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee. The president is showing leadership, the president is showing guts. Okay, fair enough, par for the course. It's legal, said Maryland Representative C.A. Dutch Ruppersberger, the ranking Democrat on House Intelligence Committee. It's legitimate, and we're taking out someone who has attempted to attack us on numerous occasions. Remember, we're talking about a U.S. citizen here. So I propose to you that any of the 244 Project Censored interns who contributed to this year's book would look at that and say, this is standard corporate media reporting. Balance equals objectivity. We quote a Democrat, we quote a Republican, we've covered the story fairly, right? They both seem to agree, hey, the Republican says it's gutsy, it's leadership, the Democrat says it's legal. It's over. Move on to the next thing, whatever the junk food or abuse is of the day. If you continue on a little deeper in the story, again, I'm reading from the AP story, but the legal process that led to his death was set in motion a decade ago. On September 17, 2001, President George W. Bush signed a presidential order authorizing the CIA to hunt down terrorists worldwide. The order made no distinction between foreigners and U.S. citizens. I would be willing to bet anyone here tonight that any of the 244 Project Censored student interns who contributed to this book, any of the Censored interns I worked with in previous years as Associate Director of Censored, and any of the students who I anticipate working with as I work on drone stories for next year's book, would be able to look at that and say, this is where we get what Michael Schudson might call the politics of narrative form. And by that I mean that embedded in this as simply background is the framing of the killing of a U.S. citizen by the U.S. government without any legal process, without due process, as legal. Yeah, and so my point here is a simple one. When you support Project Censored, and I know I'm speaking in part to an audience that includes current and former Project Censored interns, the people who give me hope, when you support it, you're supporting the education of these people, you're helping to send them out into the world as students who I work with, like Sarah Maddox and Bridget Thornton and Jeff Hewling. You're supporting them to become the next generation of kind of knowledge workers that Kenn was talking about. So I don't see anyone drifting yet back to the moleskin display. So I'm going to conclude with a quotation from George Eliot. I was happy when I strolled through the bookstore earlier tonight to see that this novel is actually for sale right over next to Mickey. George Eliot writes in Mill on the Floss, "It seems to me that we can never give up longing and wishing while we are alive. There are certain things we feel to be beautiful and good, and we must hunger for them." For the duration that I've been involved with Project Censored, it's helped to sustain me and to keep me from starving. So salute to everyone involved, and thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Andy Roth. I also didn't mention that Andy's a chess master. Andy's concentration and focus on the students has been, really one of the great reminders for us here tonight. Again, is that Project Censored is student-based, it is community-based. Yes, there are faculty members, and we're on over 30 colleges and universities in the United States and in over 6 countries. But we really try to focus on students, doing student research, and really helping people develop a sense of media literacy. And like Andy just said, I think that's really what gives us hope, as we see how these people are going into the world and the things that they're doing. And it's really an honor to be part of that process. Our next speakers, we have a couple people coming up here that were not on the schedule for a few minutes. We're going to then we'll be with Tracy Rosenberg. We'll hear from independent journalist Josh Wolf, and then we're going to hear from a couple of students themselves before we wrap it up. The next speakers are Elaine Wellen, a sociologist at Sonoma State, and Kristen Seraphin, also our newest board member, came on the board at the same time this past summer with Abby Martin. So they're going to come up and talk about health and environment, which is one of the censored news clusters that they wrote about in the book this year. Please welcome Elaine and Kristen.
this way down. Hi. Well, Kenn talked about collaborative knowledge workers and connecting the dots. And I think that that's what we tried to do with this new cluster approach, is help us reframe things so that people can connect those dots. But the corporate media frame environmental issues, disasters, and especially health outcomes as isolated events, denying what even today's school children know about the complex interconnectedness of the world's ecosystems and the effects on individuals within them. Of particular concern to Project Censored are the ways that environmental waste and contamination and its subsequent effects are ignored, wrongly framed, deeply flawed, and misrepresented by the corporate media. Examples include the global spread of the superbug bacteria, the emerging Lyme disease epidemic mentioned before, oil and toxic dispersant contaminations from British Petroleum, BP, the oil explosion disaster, don't call it the spill, and the unfolding effects of one of the world's worst nuclear reactor accidents since Chernobyl, of course, Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plants in Japan. Half of the United States newly elected Congress members deny climate change. Half. And the federal government has released big polluters from oversight and accountability. Analysis of corporate responsibility and the true cost to human health and the environment are rarely addressed. For instance, after provoking the worst environmental disaster in America, BP ultimately got off the hook. Installed new rigs, worked all the way through the disaster, and installed new rigs within a year. The fundamental connection between reckless corporate behavior and its impact on the environment was ignored, with dire consequences for humans and the planet. Environmental catastrophes are framed as isolated events, with a beginning, maybe a bit of passing human interest, and an end. And the ongoing environmental damage seldom hits the press. Kristen has some words to say as well.
The late comic and critic George Carlin once said, "It's called the American dream because you have to be asleep to believe it." And this book is the antidote to the American dream, which is actually an American nightmare. And the beauty of this book is that it doesn't leave you with a sense of learned helplessness. There are real solutions to these problems. And the common heritage is one of those real viable solutions.
Thank you, Lady Kristen. And speaking of the common heritage, Project Censored International, we divide the book into 3 sections now. The first is on the censored news and deja vu, what's happened to previous stories, junk food news, the good news, and the media democracy in action. We're going to hear from Tracy Rosenberg and Josh Wolf here in a little bit, in 1 minute. Just before, but Kristen just talked about something called the common heritage, and we're going to hear from Mary Leah, who has been working with Dorothy Anderson, the wife of the late Alfred Anderson, and we're working on something now called the Fair Share, the Common Heritage. And Mary has been one of the key people working on our board with Dorothy on the Commons Project. So has Kenn Burrows. I've been involved. Certainly others on the board have been. And in our Project Censored International book, we have these 3 sections. The second is Truth Emergency. This third is Project Censored International, what's going on in the world about media censorship issues. And this year we focused on human rights and the right to know. We heard from Ann Garrison. We heard from Nora, Barrows, Friedman. And a really, again, an undercurrent here of this, at least for us, is we have a direct overlap at Project Censored and free press issues with the Commons. And you know, I don't know how many of you are familiar with David Bollier or On the Commons, a scholar and journalist. He wrote a book in 2002. I think it's a really important book. I use it sometimes in one of my early U.S. history courses. It's called Silent Theft, the Private Plunder of Our Commonwealth. And part of it, I think, that overlaps with Project Censored greatly is Bollier writes, quote, "The loss of the public commons in broadcasting must be counted as one of the great civic and cultural losses of the 20th century. The right to know, the right to have access to information." And that's how Project Censored really ties in, and Media Freedom is tying in. But Mary is really working in other ways with Dorothy, and we're really trying to grow the project. We have a website, Fair Share Heritage. What is the website? I should know it. It's on the list. The project is the Fair Share of the Common Heritage, but the website is fairsharecommonheritage.org, and you can link to it to our site. But here's Mary to tell us about what this is and what we're trying to do with it. Mary?
Okay, thank you. The Commons is based really on one significant idea, and the person that we really have to thank today are the Andersons. Andersons have helped provided the seed money to bring this project forth, and we have many plans for it. And it's really based on one idea. Every sentient being, human and non-human, has the right to the fair share of the common heritage. We have a right to the fair share of the material and economic wealth of the common heritage. Included in this common heritage are all the Earth's natural resources, land surfaces, subsurface minerals, fuels, water, air, indeed the entire physical environment. This heritage wealth should not be privately owned, especially not by an elite few. It should be held in a democratically controlled local, regional, national, and global trusts. The renewable parts, land, water, and air, should be leased out, and the income used to distribute financial and other benefits among the Earth's inhabitants. In addition, we recognize the knowledge and inventions created by previous generations. Cyberspace is such an example. Dorothy and Alfred Anderson have entrusted us to encourage the discourse on the common heritage. Last year, we began an essay contest, which we see many familiar faces were at our event last year in Berkeley, where we gave out a total of $6,000 that was given to us. $3,500 went to Dr. James Boyce from the East Coast, writing on the implements of economics and pollution and inequality, and how inequality actually creates more pollution. And the other person was Cliff Cobb, and I was really impressed by Cobb's essay because it talks about that we have to bring our differences together in order to come under one goal. So it doesn't matter if we disagree on the little things, it's the big things. So this is a really interesting project to be involved in, and I'm lucky to be working with some great people. Mickey's helping me a lot. Kenn Burrows has helped me. Kristen Seraphin has helped me with writing. Bill Simon did help with a survey. So we get a lot of input, so a lot of us can bring our strengths and what we have forward. So our plans are to write some curriculum and bring it to the schools. And I'm not just talking the schools where everybody just wants to get an A. One of the best places to go is into the alternative schools. And there's one in Petaluma that is right next to a recruiting center. And a lot of these kids like to hunt and fish, and they like guns. Well, let's show them how to use it wisely. Let's show them that, hunting can be an environmental thing. I know some of the vegetarians might be horrified by that, but sometimes when I look at kids like this, they're so neglected. They're not going to go to college. They're waiting for them to go in the military. So if anybody has any ideas how we can capture this audience, send me an email. Appreciate your input. Thanks so much.
You can get more information at fairsharecommonheritage.org. We do a chapter, we've done a chapter for a long time, we brought it back, it's Media Democracy in Action. Peter Phillips used to do this a lot, really looking at how Project Censored is a media democracy project. And democracy is a verb. It's something we do. I want to give a quick shout out to the man that's leaving the building right now. It's John Gilbert. John Gilbert has been at Seven Stories Press forever with Dan Simon. And John Gilbert is the guy that makes the book look like this every year. So I'd love to give a big round of applause to John. John also drop ships the books that we have to sell tonight so you can look at them. And John also deals with the too many pages that I've sent him for the last 2 years, so I apologize for that. But we need to fix some of the things that are going on so the book will be shorter and we won't need it anymore. So, mea culpa, but it's not my fault. Thank you. Our next speaker is in a group of people that we wanted to highlight this year, of both veteran media democratic activists and newcomers. We have, of course, Abby Martin in the chapter. You're going to hear from Josh Wolf in a few minutes, independent journalist and filmmaker. But we also went back and looked at some people that have been around a while and have really contributed to the media democracy movements we have in this country. PR Watch, Center for Media Democracy out of Madison, Wisconsin, was founded by John Stauber. Now run up by Lisa Graves. We had her on just the other day on the radio. Jeff Cohen, now at the Park Institute for Independent Media, that founded Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting. These are really seminal institutions in terms of media democracy, freedom of information, fighting censorship, and so forth. And in the chapter, we also heard from people like Khalil Bendib, who does the cartoons here every year, but he also has a show on KPFA and is a fierce free speech activist. We had some people from Courage to Resist fighting for Bradley Manning. Michael Thurman's hiding over there. He was one of the people that helped hook us up with the people that wrote about Bradley Manning at WikiLeaks and the right to know and to stop the campaigns, to shoot the messenger. And we thank those people. Also my students, Nolan Higdon and Ryan Sheehy. Ryan was here at one point. He may have left, did research to compile a list of media democracy organizations. Well, this person is sitting with us tonight and is going to come up and say a few words. It's Tracy Rosenberg, and you may know her from Pacifica and some of the things at KPFA, but she's also the head of another media organization that's been around as long as Project Censored, and that is Media Alliance, and Tracy's here to talk to us about what they do. And if you're unfamiliar about what Media Alliance does, you really should check out the website and really look at the grassroots things they're doing to stop things like big corporate mergers and stop conglomeration of big media. So Tracy, thanks for joining us.
Hi everyone. So I want to congratulate Project Censored on an amazing 35 years of some of the most forward-thinking and meaningful media activism work in the country and in the world today. I also want to congratulate them on coming on board at KPFA on Friday mornings. I was actually the person who gingerly made a phone call and said, well, Mickey, what do you think? And I'm eternally grateful and happy and proud that he did indeed walk into that ring of fire, as it were. Okay. When I was asked to speak here, what I was asked to do was talk a little bit about what my organization has been doing in the past 6 months to a year, and sort of how that relates to Project Censored and their book. I hear a lot of people talking about the media revolution and a lot of people talking about the amazing work that individuals are doing. One of the things that I need to say to talk a bit about what we've been doing is that the platforms, the tools, the programs, what's the right word now, the apps that we're all using to do this work, the majority of them are owned by them, those corporations over there. And they are moving rapaciously, enthusiastically, progressively to lock that space down. And what that means is that space in which we all do this work, it's getting squeezed. We saw in broadcast where it squeezed and squeezed and squeezed until there really wasn't much left, except maybe little islands like KPFA out over there, but those are little tiny islands. What we want to call cyberspace, same kind of squeeze going on. What we want to call the mobile universe, same kind of squeeze going on. So when people ask what I've been doing for the last 4 months, it begins with 3 letters, and those letters are AT&T. I think I'm going to tell a little story about that because I think that it sort of leads into why Project Censored matters and why this book matters so much. About, let's see, I think it was about mid-May, 4 months ago. I was sitting at a public meeting trying to get a public agency to do something that they didn't really want to do. And it was one of those public comment sessions, and you know kind of how those sessions go. They're usually held in the middle of the day at an obscure agency that didn't publicize it. And we're all sort of sitting there on these podiums watching democracy in action, except it's not really democracy in action. That's not what's going on. So I'm sitting there, and we're 2 hours into this thing, and 29 people in a row have gotten up, and they've all announced proudly that what's good for AT&T is good for America, or something like that. You can say that about 20 different ways, but basically what they were saying is that if AT&T thrives, then America will thrive. And I was getting kind of discouraged. You know, you kind of sit there and and you keep hoping maybe every 5th person might say something kind of like the truth, or maybe every 10th person, or we're getting to like 25 people, and I'm like, 1. I just want 1 other person. No, not going to happen. So I realized that it's all me. And I thought about kind of why that was, and I realized it was Tuesday at 11 a.m., and the 99% of the population was at work, where they had to be. And I realized that I had to speak for those people because there was no one else here in the room that was going to do that. So I didn't leave, so I didn't get upset. So I went up and made the speech, and took 3 minutes rather than my allotted 2 minutes, because I figured I was speaking for 99% of the population, and it was only me, so it was kind of okay. And eventually the hook came out, and that was that. But I went back down, and in the weirdness of these kinds of meetings, I was sitting right next to, as it turned out, the president of AT&T California. So I plopped myself back down, and he took a look at me, and I took a look at him. And you know how you get those looks of, well, the word is contempt. And the look is, you are flea, and you are an annoying flea and I will crush you. This is what the look is. That's what it means. And I kind of took that in and thought, okay, you know, that may be. I mean, obviously 29-1 is not good odds. I know you make more in 1 day than I make in a month. I understand this. But 1 minute? Oh, geez, I'm going to get this story in 1 minute. I'll try. But I thought, but there's one thing that a flea can do. A flea can bite your ankles, and it can make you itch. And before this process is over, your ankles are going to itch, because I can't do that much. And we went through about a 3 or 4 month process, and there were lots and lots of fleas all over the country, hundreds and thousands of fleas, lots of fleas in Washington, lots of fleas here. But the upshot of that process was 4 months later, I got to watch these same individuals at a Department of Justice press conference where they were told that their little merger was about to get challenged in court by the US government. So it's not going forward. I guess what really, and you know, there's a lot of reasons why that's a good thing. Reasons about affordability of information, access to devices, privacy. AT&T turned over all the information they had about every American citizen on the order of the US government. There is no privacy in AT&T land.
And then they got Congress to retroactively
Exactly, yeah. Net neutrality. What we call information discrimination. Net neutrality is the stupidest term in the history of language. It's not about neutrality. It's about corporate discrimination about what kinds of information gets through and what kind doesn't. Full stop. So when you're talking about basically cornering markets for tools and platforms and apps that we use to speak to each other, then you're talking simply about corporate control of information. And what you're talking about is every time there's a media revolution, every time people start grabbing hold of the tools and using them to tell the truth, corporations walk in and yank that space out of our hands. And yes, probably there's some other generation of tools 20 years from now, but if we have to keep over and over and over again revolutionizing, we lose the time. We lose the time to organize, we lose the time to talk to each other, and we lose the time to change the narrative, which is what this is about. So at some point we have to say, no, you can't take these tools. They're ours, and we're going to use them. And we're going to use them to tell the truth. Every single person in this book is a flea of one kind or the other, and they are biting the ankles of the powerful and making them itch. I guess the short version of this is even when it's 30 to 1 or 300 to 1 or 3,000 to 1 or 3 million to 1, you have to start somewhere, and that somewhere starts with picking up the microphone and being the one who tells the truth. And if you're the only one in any situation, any room, anywhere that can do that, you have to do it. You have to be the one that picks up the microphone and does it. Because if nobody starts it, then it never happens. So never pass up an opportunity to be that flea, no matter what the odds. Because sometimes you're the only person that can do it. Through some fluke of circumstances, there's just nobody else there. And when that opportunity is there, you have to take it. And props to all of the people in 35 years of these books who did. Thanks.
Thanks to Tracy of Media Alliance. Tracy mentioned net neutrality. The impending demise of net neutrality is in fact a chapter in the book this year by Elliot Cohen. It's in the propaganda section on Truth Emergency. So again, I urge you to pick that up. Our next speaker, also in the Media Democracy in Action chapter, is somebody that, well, has certainly experienced a lot of action, though not all of it democratic, and that's an ongoing fashion. Please welcome independent journalist, filmmaker, the longest imprisoned blogger in U.S. history, and still raising hell and speaking truth to power, and here to tell us more about it, Josh Wolf.
All right, thanks so much, guys. It's getting close to 9 o'clock, so I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible. All right, so there's an essay that I have in the Media and Democracy in Action chapter, and I thought the best thing to do tonight would be to provide a little context for how this essay came about. So I just graduated from the journalism school at UC Berkeley, and for about 18 months of the 2-year program, I spent fighting the administration over my right to basically cover, as a student journalist, what goes on campus. So back in November 2009, there was a demonstration at Wheeler Hall where they occupied the building. The people held the doors shut, and I came in there as a journalist with a video camera to record it. Now, no one at any point ever accused me of holding doors or of helping the protesters or anything. They acknowledged I was a protester, they acknowledged I wasn't a protester, and that I was there as a journalist. But the initial response, after everyone got their tickets and the DA didn't press charges, because the DA doesn't press charges against minor protest stuff at any level, the university got frustrated and they filed student conduct charges. Now, the initial plea bargain, if you will, the offer that they gave us was a 1-semester suspension. So they said that I should take this semester of suspension because I did the journalism that I came to journalism school to do. So I obviously thought that was ridiculous. I got the dean, Neil Henry of the journalism school, to write a letter on my behalf, and that seemed to kind of affect the way student conduct thought of things. But then Nanette Asimov from the San Francisco Chronicle wrote an article in the Chronicle about how they were threatening to suspend me from journalism school for committing journalism. And they call me in the next day and they're like, so there was a little bit of a misunderstanding. We still think you're guilty of all the same charges. There was like 5 charges they wanted me to plead guilty to. But if you plead guilty, we'll, instead of suspension, we'll just give you a warning. I was like, well, I don't really want to plead guilty to like threatening the health and safety of the university, amongst other things. And I don't think I did anything wrong, so I refused. And eventually went through this process where they refused to allow me to have an advisor speak on my behalf, despite the fact that we thought we were going to. That went to a small claims lawsuit to try to have the right for me to have an advisor, just like we have a right when we're accused of a crime to have a lawyer speak on our behalf. But they didn't like that idea, and so instead they hired a lawyer for the professor who said that the professor couldn't go in front of small claims court because it'd be unfair for him not to have a lawyer there. So it had to go to Superior Court. And long story short of that is I lost that ruling because basically he has what's called quasi-judicial immunity. So he's like a fake judge, and you can't sue a fake judge. So I lost that, eventually had my hearing, where they decided whether or not I should be found responsible for, threatening the health and safety of the world for holding a camera. And I was found guilty of 3 of the 5 charges. And their initial punishment was, well, what day do you graduate? Tuesday. Well, we can't really suspend you at this point. So they were going to give me a warning. And I thought, well, that's kind of silly. They were going to give me a warning and ask me to write a paper, Write a paper about what you did wrong. I didn't do anything wrong, and what are you giving me a warning for? Why don't I not have the warning because you don't think I did anything wrong either? And eventually what it turned out to be was they assigned me, they said, clearly you have some experience in this issues of the rights of journalists, yada, yada, yada. Your assignment is to write a paper for what the policy should be for the University of California to respect the rights of its student journalists. So what the essay in the 2012 book is my proposal to the University of California about how they should respect the rights of journalists. And it's also my punishment that if I hadn't written, I wouldn't have my master's degree today. So that's what is in there. Take a look at it. If you like what you read in there, call the regents, call the UC Office of the President, because right now there are no protections for student journalists on our UC campus as they try to cover the UCI, as another speaker talked about, or the various protests that have been going on just down the street. There's no protection for student journalists, and there needs to be. So that's what my essay is about. Thanks so much for coming, and I'll hand it back to you.
Thanks for Josh. Josh is going to be on Kicky with David with us here in a few weeks to talk more about some things that have been going on at UC Berkeley. And speaking of contacting UC Regents, you can get to so-called Angry Birds with One Truth Stone, talking about Josh's bit, and also following up with Peter Byrne, who we had on the show last week, who's in the SF Bay Guardian, talking about the conflicts of interest of UC Regents and so forth. So if you're going to call up, you can always give them some good advice, and then also be critical about a few other things at the same time. Next up. And we're about finished. Thank you all for being so patient. But this is really, I think, among the most, if not the most important part of what we're about at Project Censored, and that's hearing from some of the student researchers and students that have participated, and not just learned so much, but taught us in the process, and have given so much to both the books, the websites, and we're really grateful. So we have a few students here that are going to come up tonight. Where are you? 1, 2, and we have a student here, Alex, of mine. So come on up here, the students that are going to have a few words. And you're all going to have a couple minutes apiece. This is going to basically wrap up the program for us this evening. We still have some food, refreshments, some things over here. Please help yourselves to that. Afterwards, Peter and I are going to be signing copies of 2012, anybody that wants to get copies of that, and then we'll be adjourning a block up the street for after fun refreshments, anybody that feels like carrying conversations on, because Jacob Van Vliet, our gracious host, who's probably running, there he is in the back. I wanted to give another quick round of applause to Jacob for having us here this evening. He's the one that helped set everything up. His wonderful wife helped set up all of our food and made the desserts that you had. So we're gonna again wrap up here with the students telling us about what they did, and then there's gonna be books over here. We'll be glad to sign them and talk to people while we simultaneously clean up. And anybody that wants to hang out and carry on the conversations, we'll probably be doing that up at Raleigh's. So the students here are gonna introduce themselves, talk about what they did, and then Jacob's gonna come up and wrap things up. Thanks again for your support.
Hi everybody. Can you hear me? Yes. All right. I'm Aaron Peacock. I'm a junior at San Francisco State University. I just moved to the Bay Area a couple of years ago from the infamous Orange County. And
Welcome here.
Thank you. And you know what? I have to admit, I don't really know that much about what's going on in the world around me. I think as a symptom of my environment growing up. And since I'm getting more involved. Like I joined Project Censored after taking Kenn Burrows' awesome class, Global Perspectives at SF State. I got really involved, and last year I wrote a story about nuclear power called The Fairy Tale of Clean and Safe Nuclear Power, which got voted number 8 on the top 25 list. And so I'm really proud of that. The story was about how destructive nuclear power is in spite of how clean corporate media likes to say it is, especially during what was going on last year with Fukushima and the Daiichi, the tsunami and the meltdowns. And so I continued my media literacy plunge by taking leadership in our club at SF State. Robert and I are co-presidents of the club, and we've really used this as an opportunity to get more involved in the world around us. And I think that's the real beauty of Project Censored, is that it does that for students at Sonoma State, at SF State, and all over the country. People are students that don't really know how to know the truth, are learning how to look at books or look at media and know, cross-reference, and find out what is happening. Thank you, that's all I got to share.
Hello, I'm Robert Usher. Yes, I worked with Kenn, as well as Aaron and a few other students on Chapter 4, some positive solutions. Specifically, I helped collect, search, and gather stories from community and collaboration. And just speaking about community and collaborations, look at all the people we have here tonight, and just this book is the epitome of collaboration. Without everyone that came together and put so much effort into this, it really wouldn't be what it is. And I look really forward to picking this up later tonight and reading a couple chapters out of it. I felt really inspired by some of you who came up here and spoke about what you've written. It seems like everyone's really put their heart and soul into it, so thank you for all that. And thank you all for being here. This is really great to see so many people. What I really liked about what I researched was I've always been about community and collaboration.
Close to the microphone.
Huge source of thank you. Yes. Huge source of my happiness is from people in my community and just being able to rely on them. And so a few stories that I actually were researching was about neighbors for common security. And this is just a small example, but people in Boston got together and during the downturn of the economy and really discussed the underlying causes and the roots of what's actually what's causing this economic crisis, and really became educated on what's going on and actually took their own proactive steps to do something about it. And they did so by forming neighborhood work groups, relying on each other for certain skills and things they don't have, but resources that everyone together collectively has and that they can share. And also just connecting to that, a really good website that we pulled a whole bunch of stories from was shareable.net. And this was really awesome because not only did they have all these examples of what people are doing, but they had how-tos, how to start your own neighborhood work group, how to start your own neighborhood Skillshare, how to set your up neighborhood swap meet or a farmer's market. And these were just really inspiring things to look at and see that people across the United States and large are actually doing these kinds of things, starting their own co-ops. And how it's hard to get through life alone, but together we can really pull together something meaningful and actually take the necessary steps ahead to get where we need to go. So it was just extremely gratifying. I'm just really grateful to be able to be a part of all of this, and I've learned so much, and I can't wait to even put into more work into this, and it's really great. Thank you so much for having me.
Hello, my name is Alex Silva, and I'm a student from Diablo Valley College. About a year ago, I took Mickey's class on critical thinking in history, a class which taught me how to critically think and analyze events in history. Critical thinking. I think that sums up my experience in Project Censored and the 2 Deja Vu stories I wrote for Censored 2012. The reason why I chose to work with Mickey and this organization has nothing really to do with my personal political ideology, but rather it has everything to do with what I consider to be the highest virtue human beings can hold, which is to examine everything and take nothing to be the truth. As Socrates once said, the unexamined life is not worth living. By analyzing all aspects of our society and not showing fear in the face of controversy, we have distinguished ourselves from all those drones in the mainstream media. We show ourselves to be intellectuals, unafraid of government or corporate censorship. And most of all, we espouse freedom of the press, and we thus make our lives worth living by examining the world around us. The mainstream press cannot say the same thing. I wrote 2 stories in Chapter 2, the Deja Vu chapter, stories 14 and 17. Story 14 from Censored 2011 was all about the unanswered questions that remain related to 9/11. Indeed, several puzzling factors still remain, even 10 years later. In the update for 2012, these same issues remain unresolved. When the mainstream media did bring up the issues, it was often done in ridicule and chastisement. Story 17 from Censored 2011 was about the health risks posed by nanotechnology particles. From last year to this year, the claims of dangers to the human body have only been further proved by additional scientific inquiry. And yet, the mainstream media has remained mostly silent on an issue that affects nearly every single person on this planet. Such is the way of the mainstream media. Our way is different. We not only show the people the truth, but we arm them with the ability to pierce the veil of lies so that they may see the truth for themselves. Thank you.
I'd like to thank all the students that participated this year and in all previous years, 35 years of them. I'd like to thank all the faculty and community members, certainly the students that weren't here today, Kira McDonough, Clifton Damians, Ryan Sheehy, whom we mentioned earlier. Past students, Mike Smith has been running around with a camera here. He's at SF State now. But the interesting thing about these students is we are them. They become us, and we keep all that rolling. Our webmaster, Adam Armstrong, is a former student of Peter at Project Censored. I see Chris McManus out here, another former student that has helped do research with us over the years. Again, we're a really big family. And you heard Alex saying mainstream. And I think in his context, he was talking about the corporate so-called mainstream media, because I think we're the mainstream. And I think we're the future we've been waiting for, and I think we're here now, and this book is the source book for the media revolution, and we're here now, and we need to do something about this. So, I'd like to thank everybody in here. Cynthia Burrows, who writes about nonviolent struggles and their censorship. Robin Anderson on how HBO's Treme actually has more truth reporting in it than most of the corporate news coverage combined on the tragedies of New Orleans. Single Payer singled out on the lack of coverage and distortion of Single Payer with Margaret Flowers. And I saw my colleague and friend Tomas Moniz here earlier was floating around, the author of Rad Dad, on the importance and significance of radical parenting, and I'm about to be another one again in 3 weeks. A lot of people look at these books and they say, how in the world could how could you possibly bring kids into the world? I'm like, well, because I think I'm a pretty cool parent overall, and my wife is radical as hell, and we're going to raise a kid that's going to be part of the solutions of the world. That's why. And for everybody that's part of the problem that has kids, you've got to have something to counter it. You can't just throw your hands up in the air. And being a parent is a really, I think, a really radical action if you're going to really commit yourself to doing it right. And I can say I don't always do that. But Tomas Moniz writes about that in Rad Dad, and I saw him here tonight, and I wanted to salute him, and we've had him on our radio show before, and if you don't know about Rad Dad, please check it out. And on the other end of that spectrum, we had in the book this year, and this was a big, for large thanks to my wife, who's a doula and home birth activist, and basically one of the biggest midwives, most popular now going on in the U.S., Ina Mae Gaskin, has a chapter on censorship of the true state of maternity care in the U.S. Again, so one of the biggest censored stories is about women's empowerment, natural birth, women's rights, family issues. Again, not the types you see in the corporate media. It's painted as some political tool, but real people living real lives and really trying to follow paths of truth. And I think that's something that should be celebrated, and that's something that's also in the book this year. I want to thank my great friend and colleague, Dr. Peter Phillips, for helping make all this possible. Carl Jensen, everybody that's spoken here, and all of you for all the things that you continue to do. And please contact us through projectcensored.org.